For this one, I wanted a lesson dedicated to working with neutrals. I believe there is so much that can be learned and have a deeper understanding of working with color when you start incorporating neutrals. Let's bring up that oversaturation mistake. The reason this is so harsh on the eye is because there is no variation in saturation. There leaves no place for the eyes to settle on, only finding safety in the highlight. In this new one, we have more balance and area of interest now. We still have those saturated colors included, but since they are such a low percentage compared to the neutrals in this piece, they seem to pop out more. It's all about having a nice blend of saturated areas with neutrals in your piece. And when I say neutral, don't immediately think gray, even though that is a great color to add into your piece. Neutrals can range in the hues and even brightness to an extent, but they all have the common factor of being desaturated. These colors lend themselves to enhancing the colors around them. For example, bright yellow was once a more annoying color for me and I avoided working with it. After forcing myself to incorporate yellow in a new piece, I've learned to love the color when it's placed with less saturated colors around it. It gives a new impression of the color, and it takes what I used to see as an obnoxious color and turns it into something modern and even classy looking. This love of neutrals began when I started pushing the idea of isolating saturations on purpose. I would limit my palette and work primarily with the neutral selections throughout the piece and add a pop of saturated color. Here's one of the first ones, and while it could use some cleanup, as a sketch, it served its purpose of seeing how limiting my saturated colors really could make an impact. The reds in this piece grab your attention, and whenever your eye starts to wander away, it eventually makes its way back to the red. I found that funny that an area that may consist of maybe 2% of the piece grabbed the most attention. Sometime later, one of the next pieces I really experimented with colors was on the pilot I did with CG Cookie for a new Blender course. When we take a look specifically at his eyes, they seem to be more of a desaturated blue. But when we color pick from the piece, all four selections from the hair and the eyes were actually desaturated warm colors. The skin, by comparison, makes the eyes appear blue when they are in fact not. Now, this was not intentional at first. I was trying to work with just a neutral gray, but since I was color picking from the background at the time, the colors were all desaturated oranges and ended up in the eyes. This was another happy accident while experimenting with color. So give yourself a pass to experiment with color on a throwaway piece, a practice piece with the sole intention of experimenting new color theories or combinations. Alright, so as more time passes, I can begin to see that I'm subconsciously working with desaturated colors mixed against a small pop of saturated color in places I want to draw attention to. In this example, it's very blatant where the area of focus is. Those blue flame eyes stand out against the remaining palette. The browns were added to not only give some rust texture, but meant to complement the blue in the eyes. It can be a good experiment to look at your pieces and determine where your saturation percentages lie. In this one, the neutrals make up almost the entire image with the saturated blues making up the smallest increment. But that does not mean every piece has to have this offset percentage. In fact, let me show you examples of all three. This piece was the yellow one I mentioned earlier. I specifically forced myself to use yellow, and this ended up being one of my favorite pieces to work on. In this example, there is a balance between the highest, middle, and lowest saturated colors. This piece allows multiple areas of interest, but the highest saturation and contrast still pulls the eye up to her eye and the hair. This next piece has the isolated saturation use we talked about earlier. The oranges in the eyes demand your attention, and this piece has an overwhelming amount of neutrals to really emphasize those warm colors staring right back at you. But what about the opposite? In this next piece, there is a lot of saturations flowing throughout. However, we are going to take the same theory and flip it on its head. In this image, the light areas are very desaturated but do have a higher brightness, so the area of focus actually becomes the desaturated areas. It's all about knowing where you are adding saturation and the kind of effect you want to give off in the end. So in short, when in doubt on choosing colors, try adding neutrals next time. You may even surprise yourself with the results.